Today we are getting started in Genesis chapter 37. Genesis 37 begins shifting the scene from Jacob over to Jacob's son Joseph. So to get started on Joseph today, in Genesis 37, we first are going to read about Joseph's dreams. It says, beginning in Genesis 37, verse 1, Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. Also he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. So Joseph is Rachel's oldest son. Rachel being Jacob's favorite wife. Rachel has already died. Joseph is her oldest son. He is out feeding the flock with his brothers. And he brings a bad report of Jacob's sons by the concubines of his father. The names of these sons were Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. He brings a bad report about them to Jacob. Now, something that's interesting is that Michael Whitworth said this in his book, The Epic of God. He said the Hebrew word that's used here for bad report, it represents a message that is at best derogatory. It's making them look bad. And at worst, it's deceitfully slanderous. And it's that way, that word is that way everywhere else in the Old Testament. It's used several times from the book of Numbers into Psalms, Proverbs, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. So every other time this word for bad report is used, it's a message that is at best just sort of makes the person look bad. Maybe it's true, but it's intentionally designed to make them look bad. And at worst, it might be outright false. Now, among commentators, there is some disagreement on whether or not Joseph behaved correctly in bringing this report. So was Joseph bringing a false report to his father? Was Joseph bringing a correct report, but maybe he made sure his brothers looked as bad as possible? I don't know. He's a 17-year-old young man, and sometimes youth can cause us to behave in rather immature ways. Perhaps that's what's happening here. But either way, he brings a bad report. Now, we're told on top of the bad report that Joseph brings to his father, we're also told that Joseph is the most beloved child of Jacob. Jacob had given Joseph, Michael Whitworth said, a luxury item that only those who did not have to work could think of having. So this coat of many colors is given, it's a luxury item that, you're not going to work in that. It also, by the way, it also could indicate which son was going to inherit the birthright. So a very important item. So let's get the picture in our mind here. Joseph's brothers know that Joseph is their father's favorite, even though Benjamin is younger than Joseph. Joseph is the father's favorite. Jacob tends to listen to Joseph's reports about the family business, even though Joseph is not as actively involved in the work as the rest of the brothers. That's sort of what that coat symbolized. He gave him that coat to wear. You're not going to work in a coat like that. So Joseph, it almost appears as someone who's like upper management of the family business. He's not necessarily always out in the field every day doing all the hard work that his brothers are doing. So let's think about from your perspective. Do you like to be criticized by someone, up the ladder from you at work who might not understand what all you face day to day on the job? Because that's the position Joseph's brothers are in. Jacob here is bringing a bad report about them to their father when Joseph is not necessarily out in the field getting, his hands dirty, having to do the work day in and day out. He's upper management. He's supervisor in a way. And maybe he doesn't understand everything they go through. So no doubt you don't like it when that happens to you. That's kind of the position that Joseph's brothers are in. And so on top of everything else, Jacob gives Joseph this luxurious coat, which kind of solidifies his position as upper management. So Joseph is the father's favorite. Joseph is the one that Jacob listens to, his reports of the family business, although Joseph isn't necessarily out here getting his hands dirty in all the work. So as a result of all of that, Joseph's brothers hate him, and they could not speak peaceably to him. And this is an ominous sign. Something very bad is going to happen very soon. And this situation is not getting better with time. A breaking point will soon be reached in this situation. So that's kind of the background. Then the text tells us, now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. The brothers' hate here is only magnified by Joseph's dreams. Now, Joseph's dream is a vision from God. And what he sees is all the brothers' sheaves of grain bowed down to Joseph's sheaf. And while the events of this dream were not yet known, the picture of the dream is still pretty clear. The brothers understand the point of it. Are you going to rule or reign over us? Are you going to have dominion over us? They understood the point of the dream. It says, then Joseph dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, look, I have dreamed another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers and his mother, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So Joseph has a second dream, similar to the first, but this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bow down to Joseph. Now Jacob is involved this time, and he rebukes Joseph and basically says, do you really think your mother, brothers, and even I are going to bow down to you, are going to serve you? But it says Jacob kept the matter in mind, much like Mary does after the birth of Jesus and the events surrounding Jesus as a young boy. Luke chapter 2, verse 19, and Luke 2, verse 51. And this reminds us something is to come, and God will be involved in the events that follow. So something's happening. God's providence is going to be behind the events of Joseph's life. Now, some would say what happens to Joseph here as we go forward in Genesis is just karma or luck, but Genesis is very clear. God is going to use Joseph for a reason. Now, as we think about just so far through Genesis 37, this section where we've been introduced to Joseph reminds us that a new family leader is emerging, Joseph as the new family leader. And his brothers are not pleased with this change. Up to this point, something that's been interesting to observe is think about the change in leadership up to this point and how much chaos and turmoil that has happened when that change has been brought about. Think about from Abraham to Isaac. Well, Abraham has to send Ishmael away because there's this conflict between Ishmael and Isaac. Think about the change from Isaac to Jacob. Jacob has to run away because of his deception and Esau wanting to kill him. And now think about from Jacob to Joseph. Joseph's brothers hate him, and they're going to try to get rid of him. So that's been an interesting thing to observe. Whenever there's been this change in family leadership, it's never been a smooth transition. There's always been some sort of problem when this change has happened. Now, something to think about is when the Father sent Jesus, Jesus didn't do a thing wrong, and yet he was also hated and despised. There's some questions here about Joseph's behavior. He doesn't appear to be totally innocent, and he is hated and despised. But Jesus, when he came, the Father's Son who was sent, he didn't do anything wrong, and yet he was also hated and despised. So that's an important lesson just so far through Genesis 37. And so as we pick back up, we're going to find out that the situation is about to reach a breaking point between Joseph and his brothers. Picking up in Genesis 37, verse 12, our text says, "Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, 'Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I'll send you to them.' So he said to him, 'Here I am.' And then he said to him, 'Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me.' So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem." Now, perhaps the reason why Jacob is so concerned here is you might remember the events of Genesis 34 with his daughter Dinah and everything that happened there, that situation. Shechem is where all that happened. So it's noteworthy that Jacob's sons are taking their father's flock to Shechem. Apparently, Jacob is concerned that his sons have returned to this area because he decides to send Joseph to make sure that just everything is okay with the flock and with all of his sons. So Jacob is concerned about this decision, and he's wanting just to make sure that everything's all right. Now, at this point, neither Joseph nor Jacob realizes that it will be over 20 years before they see each other again. It's going to be a long time before Jacob and Joseph see each other again. So Joseph obeys his father. He travels about 50 miles from the valley of Hebron to Shechem. When he arrives, it says, "Now a certain man found him, and there he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, 'What are you looking for? What are you seeking?' So he said, 'I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks.' So the man said, 'They have departed from here, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan.' And Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. So Joseph arrives in the area of Shechem, and he can't find his brothers. A stranger tells him that he overheard the brothers making plans to move the flock to Dothan. Now, Dothan is an area where excellent pasture land is found. So they arrive at Shechem, and they just they're looking for the best place to provide for the flock. And so Joseph heads off to Dothan. Now, when his brothers saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, 'Look, this dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, Some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams.' So Joseph's brothers see him coming from a long way off, and they immediately start making plans to kill him, dispose of the body, and then tell a lie to their father. And their motivation to do all this is connected to Joseph's dreams. Basically, they're saying, he thinks he's going to rule over us. Well, let's just kill him. Because, hey, he can't rule over us if he's dead, can he? You think about the hatred that they feel towards Joseph. They are willing to murder him because of how much they hate him. Now, their behavior here and their discussion amongst themselves, there are several things the Lord hates from Proverbs 6:16 through 19 that are mentioned here. You have a lying tongue. They're willing to lie to their father about what they've done. That's the first one. Hands that shed innocent blood. They are willing to murder their own brother because of this. And then the third thing is a heart that devises wicked plans. They're sitting here planning this. So Proverbs 6:16 through 19 mentions 7 things the Lord hates. 3 of them at least show up here. So realize that what Joseph's brothers are doing is immensely wicked. But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and he said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him." Now he said this, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. So Reuben, the oldest son of Jacob, steps in and saves Joseph's life. Reuben convinces them to throw Joseph into a pit rather than murder Joseph. The text tells us that he planned to bring Joseph back to Jacob. Now, maybe Reuben's motivation was good, but maybe his motivations were not totally pure. We'll think about that more in a moment. So the brothers, when Joseph arrived, they strip off his luxurious coat and they throw him into an empty, dry pit. This pit was a place that collected water during the rainy season, but it would eventually go dry, and right now it's totally dry. It says, then the text continues, and they sat down to eat a meal, and then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother in our flesh." And his brothers listened. Then Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. So as the brothers are sitting down to eat a meal with Joseph in the pit, they notice a group of Ishmaelite traders passing nearby. Then Judah decides, hey, let's sell Joseph. That way we can get rid of him, and we can also make some money off of getting rid of him. He says, after all, we shouldn't be the ones to kill Joseph because he is our brother. And I think the implication here is, so they sell him into slavery where maybe somebody else will kill him. His blood won't be on our hands because we won't be the ones to kill him. But eventually, probably in slavery, someone else will kill him. And so Joseph is sold for 20 shekels of silver by his own brothers. Now, something that's quite sad is when you look at maps, the trade route to Egypt would have passed fairly close by to where Jacob was living. And so as Joseph is being carried south by this trading caravan, he is probably brought within eyeshot of the area where Jacob lived. Maybe he couldn't see his home, but perhaps he probably saw a lot of familiar landmarks. He knew perhaps just over that hill or just over that mountain is my home. And so you think about that as he is carried perhaps within eyeshot of the area where he lived on his way to Egypt. Now the brothers, Joseph's brothers, thought there would be no consequences, but it would not be all that long before their descendants are enslaved in Egypt. So Moses, by inspiration, reveals how the children of Israel came to be slaves in Egypt. And they had no one to blame but themselves. They become slaves in Egypt, ultimately, because they sold one of their own into Egyptian slavery. So they have no one to blame but themselves for what ultimately ends up happening in the book of Exodus. It's a very powerful lesson that is presented here by Moses here in Genesis. So after they sell Joseph, then Reuben returns to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit. And he tore his clothes, and he returned to his brothers and said, "The lad is no more, and where shall I go?" So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, "We have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?" And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. So Reuben, we're told, is gone while they sell Joseph into slavery. And when he comes back, he tears his clothes in grief. But Reuben, it seems, is more concerned about himself. He says, where shall I go? Joseph is no more. What am I going to do? It's possible that Reuben was planning to return Joseph back to his father in the hopes of getting back into his father's good graces. You remember back in Genesis 35, verse 22, that Reuben had, it says in Genesis 35:22, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it. So, based on what he has done in the past, no doubt Reuben is not in his father's good graces. So perhaps he is hoping to return to his father's good graces by returning Joseph. But he knows now that all hope of that is gone. In fact, perhaps because he's the oldest, there's maybe more blame that is laid at his feet. So Reuben basically sees, I have no hope of ever getting back into my father's good graces now. So what they decide to do, perhaps to make sure that there is no cause for blame on them whatsoever, they tear up Joseph's coat, they soak it in goat's blood, and they bring it to Jacob. And they present it to Jacob and simply ask, "Is this Joseph's?" Jacob knows it is Joseph's, and he assumes what the brothers want him to think. He assumes that Joseph has been killed by a wild animal. Jacob helped to, you might remember back in Genesis 27, verse 9, Jacob helped to deceive his father using 2 young goats to disguise himself as Esau. And now Jacob is being deceived by his sons who use a young goat's blood to lie to him about Joseph's death. Jacob mourns for his son Joseph for many days, and he refuses to be comforted. Now, after all the losses in Jacob's life, and there has been a lot of grief up to this point, after all the losses in Jacob's life, this is the one that you might say breaks him. The death, or in his mind, the death of Joseph. But the chapter ends. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. So at the end of the chapter, we are reminded of the truth. Joseph, while Jacob believes Joseph is dead, Joseph is not actually dead. Joseph is a slave in Egypt, sold to Potiphar, and who is an officer of Pharaoh and a captain of the guard. So as we think about this chapter, wrapping it up with a lesson or two here, we're going to see, really going forward, how that God is able to use any circumstance to serve his purpose. Joseph is being mistreated, and he's sold into slavery, and yet his life isn't over, and his service to God is, in fact, only just beginning. The question that's going to be kind of shown through the next several chapters in Joseph's life is he going to remain faithful through the trials he's going to face? His service is only just beginning. Will he remain faithful? We also notice from Genesis 37, it is possible to sincerely believe a lie. Jacob sincerely believed Joseph was dead, and to be sincerely wrong. He was wrong about Joseph being dead, although he genuinely believed it was true. We think forward in the New Testament. Was Saul, or Paul, was he sincere in persecuting Christians? Well, yes, he was. He thought he was doing what was right, but was he wrong? Well, he learns on the road to Damascus that yes, in fact, he was wrong. A very important biblical principle is taught here. Sincerity, yes, it's important, But sincerity, apart from truth, is utterly worthless. It means nothing. It is false reassurance. Sincerity apart from truth is worthless. So that's Genesis 37, our introduction to Joseph. We find out how Joseph comes to be in Egypt. It's a very difficult chapter. It's a hard time. Going forward, we're going to see if Joseph remains faithful. But before the scene shifts completely to Joseph, we're going to have one more interaction with another one of Jacob's sons, Judah. And we're going to see something that happens in his life, perhaps connected to him being the one who is convincing the brothers to sell Joseph into slavery. But we'll find out more about that next time in Genesis 38. Until then, I appreciate you studying along with me, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.